volume and scale in terms of this installation of paintings by Saskia Leek, who's an Auckland-based painter who has been painting in a very concentrated fashion for over 15 years. You know, she's not someone that's kind of only just come out of art school. She's got a very, very established practice. What I find so kind of wonderfully refreshing about this presentation of work is the fact that the scale of her works is very modest and consistent with how she has been working. There's been no attempt to kind of address some kind of overblown or high drama installation mechanism. You've just got a single line of paintings that spreads through the room, but each of those paintings really hums and sings in terms of how Saskia works with colour. Now, all of these images have been taken from some kind of pre-existing source material. It could be an image, a photograph, something from a magazine. There does tend to be sort of a root point, which then, as the painting begins to have its own life through making, is adapted, and sometimes, you know, the original reference point may fade or become dissipated. That's not the point. They're kind of the object that's being depicted, I would argue, is not the point of these paintings. It's, for me, a very strong painterly investigation of form and colour and hue and tone and mood. These paintings, again, are quite deceptively simple in terms of they don't necessarily have incredibly complex compositions. There's often a central form around which paint is applied, background kind of articulated, but for me, the one that I can't get my head away from is the little corner painting in the back, sitting there on its own. It's like a treescape or some kind of possible combination of a sort of building structure and trees, but where the brushwork is slightly extended onto the frame, and in a way, yeah, just the mood and the tone of it I just find absolutely entrancing. I've seen it in a different context. It was shown at a music festival down in Bulls, in an old converted kind of sort of community hall type space. So it was in like a back bedroom, and then the kind of nostalgic reference points in terms of painting from the middle of the century through to the kinds of small domestic works that populate most houses, whether they're originals or prints, for me just became more amplified. But Saskia is working with a lot of these working with the still life genre, the fruit sort of grape, and I'm not sure what those blue ones are, whether they're peaches or I don't know what kind of fruit they might be, plums, very large plums or peaches, but rendered in this kind of violet and aqua hue, I think are just lovely. So yeah, I was really thrilled when Saskia got selected for this, because you'd think on the outset, we've got some pretty big, bold statements at play here in terms of the other three artist presentations, whereas here we've got a suite of, I don't know how many there are, Ron, is it about 18, 20, something like that? It's actually one less than the original. Yeah. Saskia is right. Yeah. Yes. And this one kind of being on its Todd on the wall, where you get the long view coming through of this little kind of abstracted maritime scene, I think, it can so command that whole wall. They're little paintings, but they kind of punch above their scale. Just before we started the talk, Ron and I were talking about, often, particularly in contemporary painting, there's an expectation for scale, and that kind of bigger is better, or more ambitious, more adventurous. But it's actually interesting. Saskia has been leading, particularly in Auckland, a generation of younger artists who are working in domestic scale size, and particularly exploring the relationship between the figurative and the abstract. So she's kind of been oddly ahead of her time for quite some time. But she does what she does, and she does what she does with a great tenderness and a great skill in terms of putting faith in the paint and what paint can do, that I get quite energised by. It might be because I used to be a painter, and so that process of not necessarily knowing the outcome before you've gone through the painterly process is one that I can strongly identify with. They're all acrylic, but it's interesting in terms of the kinds of tonal hues that she gets, and also the kind of chalky, often quite white loaded pigments that she's using, but then mixed with these kind of humming ones, like of this kind of bridge form with the blue, the aqua just popping out of that coral like nobody's business, but then with that central form, that kind of, whether it's a shaft of light, that kind of tube form, you know, deceptively simple, but just really eloquent. I constantly think of music when I think of these paintings, because they do all seem to emit their own kind of pitch or tone when you look at them. So I'm interested in how they kind of converse across the room with one another, particularly in the way that Saskia's hung them, but also how if you took any one of these works out and hung it in a different space, its impact isn't weakened, by any means. I've often seen these works singly. There was a beautiful one I saw yesterday at Hamish Mackay Gallery in Wellington, a very violet still life of grapes that is just, it's almost like too much. The violet is so potent and powerful that you kind of almost have to stop looking at it, because it's kind of, you know, can be so close to veering into kitsch but never quite does, for me anyway. It always steps back from that.